When he walked into my bedroom that night, he was no longer the man my daughter loved, but a monster I never imagined could exist beneath that polite smile. Hello, my dear friends. This is Evelyn speaking to you from my little house in Charleston, South Carolina, now that I'm 78 years old. This sacred place has held me through so much suffering. Today, I'll share a story I've kept in my heart for nearly 40 years. It's a story of pain, but also of overcoming it. Before I begin, I hope you'll comment below about how many children and grandchildren you have. I'd love to learn about the lives of my dear viewers watching this. Also, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. I was born in 1947 in Bar Harbor, on the coast of Maine. Anyone who knows the place understands it's a small town that seems frozen in time, with Victorian-style houses, colourful shops, and the gentle sound of the ocean lapping at the shore. Back then, we couldn't even imagine the tourism industry as it is today. It was a simple place of fishermen and artisans, where everyone knew each other, where kids could play in the streets until dusk without a worry. My father, Walter, was a fisherman. He left before dawn on the wooden boat he built himself and returned when the sun was high, bringing fresh fish for my mother, Beatrice, to prepare skillfully. Besides taking care of the house and our 5 children, I was the youngest. She made jams to sell for extra family income. Even today, I can still smell the apple butter she prepared in that copper pot, stirring for hours until it reached the perfect thickness. I learned to make sweets from her. From a young age, I stood beside her, watching and helping her cut fruit, mix syrups. Evelyn, the secret isn't just in the recipe, it's in the love you put into it while preparing, she told me. And she was right. I've never been able to make apple butter as good as hers, even following the exact steps. My childhood was simple but happy. I went to school up to the 4th grade at the only school in town, then had to drop out. Back then, for girls like me from working-class families, education was almost a luxury. Unfortunately, that's just how people thought at the time. By age 15, I was helping my mother make jams and learning to craft things from seashells and materials found on the beach. I made necklaces, earrings, and other decorations. Small decorations to sell to the few tourists who came to town, especially in the summer. One day, while selling necklaces in the square near the church, I met Charles. He wasn't from Bar Harbor. He came from Baltimore for work. He was a technician for a company installing power grids in the town. Yes, my dear friends, at that time, many places in America still didn't have electricity. Imagine how we lived with just oil lamps and candles. Charles was different from the boys I knew. Older. Already 25, he had education and knew the world beyond our small town. He spoke in a way that captivated me, telling stories of places I didn't even know existed. One day, he'll take you to see Baltimore, he promised me after buying the seashell necklace I made. He was only in Bar Harbor for 2 months, time enough for us to fall in love, against my parents' wishes. Who would have thought he would leave me? We started meeting in secret, at night, When everyone was asleep, I'd sneak out the window and we'd meet on the beach, where we'd talk for hours under the starry sky. One night, with the waves as our witness, I gave myself to him for the first time, young and innocent. I believed in his promises of eternal love. "He'll come back for you," he said the night before he left. "Wait for me." And I waited, day after day, week after week, until my period was late and I started to panic. I was pregnant. At 18, unmarried in a small town where rumors spread faster than the wind. When I told him, my father nearly threw me out of the house. My mother cried for days. "That man will never come back. Evelyn, you've ruined your life." But to everyone's surprise, Charles did come back. It wasn't just an empty promise. When he heard I was pregnant, he did what he thought was right. He proposed to me. My parents reluctantly agreed. As my mother often said, reflecting the mindset of the time, we married in a simple ceremony at St. Paul's Church. By then, my belly was starting to show under the simple white dress my mother made. Afterward, we moved into a small rented house near the harbour. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was ours. Charles managed to get transferred to work on electrical maintenance in Bar Harbour and the surrounding areas, which meant he sometimes had to go away for days to other towns. But he always came back. Grace was born on a warm night in January 1965. It was a difficult home birth with the help of a midwife, as was common back then. When I first held her in my arms, that tiny life with her father's eyes and my nose, I knew my life would never be the same. The love I felt was so immense, so overwhelming that every hardship seemed small in comparison. The early years weren't easy. Charles earned very little. I tried to help by making jams and crafts between feedings, between changing cloth diapers and baths in the tub. We lived in that rented house, dreaming of owning our own home one day. Grace grew up healthy and smart. From a young age, she showed curiosity about the world around her, which reminded me of her father. "Mom, why is the sky blue? Mom, where does the sun go at night?" So many questions I often didn't know how to answer. "She needs to learn." "Evelyn," Charles said. He didn't want her to go through what I had, dropping out of school so early, and we both agreed on that. Our daughter would have opportunities we never had. When Grace turned 7, we made one dream come true. We bought a small plot of land on the outskirts of Bar Harbour, where Charles, with his friends' help, built our own house. The house wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. But it was ours. The yard was spacious, with enough room for me to plant herbs for tea and some fruit trees. We also built a small outdoor kitchen, where I canned goods to sell. By that time, Bar Harbour was starting to change. Tourism was growing. The town was being discovered for its historic and natural beauty. That opened new opportunities for us. My preserved goods and crafts became more popular. Besides his job at the power company, Charles started doing small maintenance jobs at the new guest houses that were popping up. Grace grew up with the town, smart, dedicated. She was the joy of her school. Unlike me, she had the chance to continue her education. At 16, she talked about going to college and dreamed of becoming a teacher. I don't know where she got that intelligence from. Charles joked. So proud of our daughter. Of course, I'd reply it was from you. And that was the truth. He might not have had much formal education, but he had innate intelligence, curiosity about the world, a desire to learn, and he passed that on to our Grace. Many years passed. Our life was simple but happy. We worked hard, but we managed to live decently and give our daughter what she needed. Our little house gradually improved. New floors here, fresh paint there. Furniture we bought through sacrifices. Charles even added a second bathroom when Grace entered her teens. He said women need privacy and to always consider that. When Grace turned 18, the same age I was when she was born, great news came. She was accepted into an education program at a university in Baltimore. It was a mix of joy and sadness. Joyful to see her achieve her dream. Sad to know she'd be leaving us, that she'd be away from home, and we wouldn't have her by our side every day. I'll miss you both so much, she said, crying the night before she left. We'll miss you too, my daughter, I replied, swallowing my tears, with tears in my eyes. But that's the natural order of life. Children grow up, spread their wings and fly, while parents stay behind, cheering them on to fly high and strong. Charles, always the practical one, added, and remember, Baltimore isn't too far. You can come home on weekends during breaks, and we can visit you too. And that's how our Grace left, carrying one suitcase full of dreams and another with jams I made so she wouldn't miss home as much. Her college years flew by. Our daughter would visit when she could, always sharing stories about her classes, her classmates, and life in the big city. In her final year, she introduced us to Edward. Tall, handsome, well-dressed, with an educated way of speaking, he was a professor at the university where Grace studied. Older, already 35, he seemed mature, stable in life. He's very serious. Mom. Grace confided in me while we prepared lunch in the kitchen. We're thinking of getting married once I graduate. I have to admit, at first I was worried. The age difference. He was 15 years older than me. Gave me pause, and there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite define, that made me uncomfortable. But who was I to question? I married young too, and chose a man older than me. Charles, on the other hand. Charles liked Edward right away. Men understand each other. They spent hours talking about politics, about America, about the world. Edward had strong opinions, spoke with conviction. Charles, simpler, quieter, listened to him with admiration. He'll take good care of our girl. Charles told me one night after they walked around town, he's a serious man with a secure future. And so, when Grace graduated in 1987, they got married. A more elaborate ceremony than ours, held at the same church where we had married years before. Grace glowed in the white dress we bought with so many sacrifices. Edward, elegant in his dark suit, looked like the happiest man in the world. The reception was held in our yard, decorated with flowers and lights, tables scattered under the trees Charles had planted years ago. I prepared the food for days. Friends brought food and drinks. It was a simple celebration, but full of love. After the wedding, Grace and Edward moved to Baltimore, where he continued teaching at the university. And she got a job as an elementary school teacher. They'd visit us a few times a year, around Christmas, in July for vacation, and occasionally on a long weekend. Our life went back to how it was before Grace was born. Just Charles and me, now in our 40s, taking care of the house, the work, and looking after each other. I missed my daughter every day, but I comforted myself knowing she was healthy, building her own life, happy with the man she chose. That's the truth, Evelyn. Charles would say to me when he caught me sighing with longing, "Kids are like birds. We raise them, care for them, teach them to fly, and one day they need to leave the nest. That's part of life." And he was right. That's part of life. What I didn't know, what I couldn't even imagine, was that life was about to play a cruel trick on us, turning everything we knew upside down, to test our strength in a way I never could have imagined. But that's the story I'll tell you soon in this video. For now, leave a comment about what you're doing while watching. Do you have a cup of coffee in hand or a cup of tea? And also tell me how many children and grandchildren you have. I want to know a bit about each of you watching me. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It was a sunny Sunday morning in July 1989 when the life I knew collapsed like a sandcastle. Charles and I had just finished breakfast on the porch, looking out at the sea in the distance, planning the rest of the day. He wanted to go fishing with some friends. I needed to prepare an order of canned goods for a new guest house in town. I'll be back before lunch. "Evelyn," he said, kissing me on the forehead before leaving. That kiss, if I'd known it would be the last, I would have held his face in my hands. I would have looked deep into his eyes. I would have told him once more how much I loved him. 3 hours later, there was a knock at my door. It was Frank, Charles's fishing buddy, from the look on his face. Even before he spoke, I knew something terrible had happened. "Evelyn. Charles had a heart attack on the boat. It seems that way. We tried to get him back as fast as we could. But I didn't hear the rest. A buzzing filled my ears. The world spun around me. And when I came to, I found myself sitting on the kitchen floor, sobbing in the arms of the neighbor who ran over when they heard my scream. Charles, my companion for 22 years, my first and only love, my safe harbor, was gone. Just like that. Without warning. No goodbye. Nothing I could do to stop it. The funeral was held in our living room, as is customary in this town. It seemed like all of Bar Harbor was there. Charles was loved and respected. Even people we barely knew came to pay their respects. Grace arrived that night, tears streaming, with Edward by her side. Seeing her, it was like a knife to my chest. She had his eyes exactly, tilting her head when she was sad. "You're all I have now," she said, before we fell into each other's arms, sharing a pain words couldn't express. The burial was the next day, after it was all over, after the last people left the house with their dishes of food and unhelpful condolences. I found myself alone with Grace and Edward. "Come with us to Baltimore." "Mom," Grace pleaded. You can't stay here alone. At least not right now. Part of me wanted to accept. The thought of staying in that house full of memories, sleeping alone in the bed I'd shared with Charles for so long, terrified me. But another part knew I needed to face the pain in my own space, in my own time. I need to stay. Sweetheart, I have memories to hold on to. I have friends here. And your father. His presence is in every corner of this house. I can't give that up now. Edward, who had been silent until then, spoke up. Let her be. Grace. She's right. She needs her space to process all this. But we can stay a few more days to help sort things out. And they did. They stayed for a week. Grace helped me organize the papers, figure out the details of the small pension Charles left, decide what to do with his clothes and personal items. Edward handled the administrative matters, the bank, notary, documents. When they returned to Baltimore, I felt the house emptier than ever. The nights were the worst, lying in that bed that now seemed too big, clutching the pillow that still smelled like Charles. I'd cry until I fell asleep from exhaustion. The days dragged on. I'd wake up, automatically make jams, serve a few customers who came, tend to the house without really seeing what I was doing. It was like living in a bubble of pain that separated me from the rest of the world. Grace called almost every day. Sometimes Edward called to ask if I needed anything. They promised to visit during the next break. September came, bringing the humid heat typical of Bar Harbor. 3 months without Charles. Of course, the pain was still there, but gradually I could breathe again. I could go a few minutes without thinking of him, without the ache in my chest. That's when Edward showed up alone. Grace couldn't come, he explained, standing at my door with a small suitcase. Too many exams to grade. The start of the semester is busy. But I took a few days off and thought I'd come check on you. At first, I found it strange. Why would he come without Grace? But I quickly dismissed the doubt. After all, he was my son-in-law. Edward was just being attentive and concerned for his widowed mother-in-law. The first few days were peaceful. Edward would leave early, saying he was exploring the town, maybe doing some fishing, like Charles used to. He'd return in the late afternoon. We'd have coffee together on the porch, talking about everyday things. Then, the comments started. Small at first, subtle, then increasingly direct. You take good care of yourself. You take good care of yourself for your age. Mrs. Evelyn, that dress looks lovely on you. It highlights your qualities. Charles was a lucky man to have a woman as attractive as you. I pretended not to understand and changed the subject. I'd retreat to my room earlier. I told myself I was misunderstanding, that it was just awkward comments from someone trying to be kind. Until the night he brought wine. To celebrate, he said, opening the bottle on the kitchen table. Celebrate what I asked. Confused. Life. Mrs. Evelyn. Charles wouldn't want you to grieve forever. He wants you to move on. Find joy again. I took a small glass just to be polite. I don't usually drink, especially since Charles passed. The wine had a bitter taste. leaving a strange aftertaste in my mouth. "It's a bit strong," I commented. "It's a special wine," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It'll help you relax." After the second glass, I started feeling unusually dizzy, my vision blurring. I thought it was the wine, but there was something more. A heavy drowsiness took over my body, making my limbs feel like lead. "I think I need to lie down," I mumbled, trying to stand and nearly collapsing. Edward caught me, his arm around my waist, his hands touching parts of my body in a way that made me uncomfortable even in my confusion. "I'll help you," he said, his voice now deeper, more dangerous. What happened next comes back to me in my memory, like chaotic scenes from a nightmare I try but can't forget. Edward carried me to the bedroom, his weight pressed down on me on the bed I shared with Charles, his rough hands, his breath reeking of wine and cigarettes. I weakly tried to push him away. My slurred voice begged him to stop. The physical and emotional pain came all at once. Then merciful darkness swallowed me. I woke up when the sun was high, sunlight streaming through the curtain gap. The first thing I felt was pain. Every part of my body ached, especially between my legs, where I felt a burning that made me groan involuntarily as I tried to move. Then I realized what had happened. The scattered memories of the night before pieced together like puzzle fragments. Edward, the wine, the bedroom, the violation. I tried to get up, but the sharp pain made me fall back onto the bed. I looked at my body and saw bruises on my thighs, arms, chest, and blood on the sheets. It was my blood. When I finally made it to the bathroom, leaning on the wall, the mirror showed me a face I hardly recognized. One eye swollen, one lip split, finger marks on my neck. More than the physical pain, what destroyed me inside was the humiliation, the violation not just of my body, but of my trust, my respect, and the memory of Charles. I cried until I had no tears left, sitting on the cold bathroom floor, hugging my knees like a lost child. Edward was gone. The house was empty, silent, now tainted by the horror of what had happened within its walls. I didn't know what to do. Call the police who would believe me, a 42-year-old widow accusing a respected university professor. Call Grace. How could I tell my only daughter that the man she married, the man she loves, did this to me? I spent the whole day in agony and hesitation, barely able to move, barely able to think clearly. That night, I heard the phone ring in the living room. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, I dragged myself over, fearing it might be Grace, dreading that it was her. "Mom, is everything okay? I've called several times today." My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Even I didn't recognize it. "I've got a bad cold, sweetheart. I've been in bed all day. Edward said you were fine when he left yesterday. He suddenly returned to Baltimore. Said you insisted you were great, that he could go back to work. So that's what he told you, that I was fine, that I insisted he leave." That lie disgusted me as much as the act itself. "Sweetheart," I began, not knowing how to continue, how to tell her, how to destroy her life as mine was destroyed. "Mom, you're scaring me. I need him to come alone." This is important. What happened? Is it about Dad? Did they find something? Is there a problem with the pension? Honey, it's something else. Please come as soon as you can. She arrived the next afternoon, taking the first bus from Baltimore to Bar Harbor. When I opened the door, her face shifted from a worried smile to utter horror at the sight of me. Mom? Mom, what happened? Were you robbed? Did you fall? I did what I hadn't been able to do since waking up that horrific morning. I hugged my daughter and cried. I cried as if the world was ending, as if I could release all the horror through my tears. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I led her to the kitchen. We sat at the table where we'd shared so many family meals, where just 2 days before, Edward had offered me that cursed wine. Sweetheart, I began, taking her hand. What I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear. I need you to understand that I don't want to hurt you, but I can't keep this to myself. And I told her every detail I could remember, every word, every gesture. I told her about the comments over the previous days, about the groaning, about how I felt unable to defend myself, unable to scream, unable to scream. I told her about waking up destroyed, about the fear, the shame, the irrational guilt I felt, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. Grace listened in silence. Her face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, disgust, anger. When I finished, she was pale, shaking, with cold hands in mine. "Are you sure?" she finally asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Absolutely sure. Maybe it was just a nightmare. Confusion from medication, from the wine." It hurt. It hurt deeply to hear my daughter question my certainty, implying I might be confused, that I might have imagined something so horrific. But I understood. It was a lot to process. Easier to believe in a misunderstanding than to accept that the man she loved was capable of something so evil. "Look at me, darling," I replied, pointing to my swollen face and the bruises on my arms. "Look at this house. There's blood on my bed. I'm 42 years old, not some confused child mixing reality with nightmares. I know what happened. I know what he did." She stood up so abruptly she knocked over her chair. She paced the kitchen like a caged animal, running her hands through her hair, mumbling incoherently. Then she stopped, looking at me with a fierce determination that reminded me of Charles in his decisive moments. "Now we're going to the police." I shook my head. "Sweetheart, who will believe it? It's my word against his. A university professor against a widow from a small town. Besides, he's your husband. Think of the scandal this would bring to your life. To hell with my life," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "He can't even say a word. To my own mother when I'm not home. Trusted. Waiting. He deserves to pay. Mom, he deserves to rot in prison for what he did." In that moment, I saw that my daughter had made her choice, between her husband and her mother, between the love she thought she had and the harsh truth. She chose to stand by me. It was as if a weight lifted from my chest, allowing me to breathe for the first time since it happened. "What do we do now?" I asked, too exhausted to think straight. "First," I'll take you to the hospital. We need to document the injuries, do an examination, then we'll go to the police. And in the meantime, I'll call him. Call him for what? Her eyes flashed with anger I'd never seen before. To get him to confess, to make sure he doesn't evade what he did. And that's how our journey for justice began. A journey much longer and more painful than we could have imagined at the time. A journey that not only tested our courage, but also tested the bond that ties us as mother and daughter, as women, as survivors. What we didn't know as we left that house for the hospital was that Edward had fled, that he had disappeared from Baltimore and taken whatever he could with him. He didn't just leave a grieving wife and a violated mother-in-law, but also other secrets, other victims, other horrific stories that we only discovered later. But in that moment, despite the pain, despite the trauma, there was one thing that gave me the strength to move forward. I wasn't alone anymore. My daughter believed me. My daughter chose the truth, no matter how painful it was. And somehow, we would find a way to get through this darkness together. The county hospital in Cape May at the time was small and under-equipped. The doctor who examined me, Dr. Paul, was the only one on duty. That night, I saw in his eyes first surprise, then pity, as Grace explained what had happened. He said, in a soft voice, as if we were in a church, "We need to conduct a medical exam, but we don't have the proper equipment here. It would be better to go to Atlantic City, an hour away on that bumpy road." Every jolt was a stab of pain through my already battered body. Grace drove your father's car, now mine, in silence, her knuckles white from gripping. The steering wheel, occasionally, a tear would escape and roll down her cheek, but she'd quickly wipe it away, as if she didn't have the right to cry while I was suffering even more. At Atlantic City Hospital, things were different. The forensic doctor, Martha, examined me carefully and respectfully. She photographed the bruises, collected samples, asked detailed questions that made me relive the horror. But I knew they were necessary. She told me while filling out the forms, "You're very brave." Many women don't have the strength to report it, especially in circumstances like this. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. I felt ashamed, as if I'd lost something that I could never get back. But I looked at my daughter sitting in the chair beside me, and I knew I had to keep going for her, for me, for all the women who went through what I did and couldn't speak up. From the Atlantic City Police Department, they sent us back to Cape May. They explained that the crime was in their jurisdiction, another hour on the road, and we arrived nearly midnight. The Bar Harbor Police Station was an old building, dimly lit, with only 2 officers on duty at that hour. The chief, a middle-aged man named Silver, greeted us with obvious impatience. It was late. They were about to end their shift. But when Grace explained why we were there, he sat up straight in his chair, suddenly more alert. "You're accusing your son-in-law of rape?" he asked, looking straight at me with a face that was both skeptical and something more, almost like amusement. as if I'd just told a bad joke. Yes, I answered, trying to say it firmly. And I have the medical report proving the violence. He glanced at the stack of papers Grace placed on the table, flipping through them quickly without really reading. You know this is a very serious accusation, right, Mr. Edward is a respected man, a university professor? Are you absolutely sure there's no misunderstanding? The same words Grace had used hours before, as if you could mistake a brutal assault for anything else. Chief, I said, my voice now stronger, full of anger. Look at my face. See, these tests. There's no misunderstanding here. I was drugged and raped by that man in my own home. On the bed I'd shared with my husband for over 20 years. He seemed uncomfortable with my directness. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and looked at his watch. We'll file the report, he finally said. But I'm warning you right now that cases like this are complicated. Your word against his, and he might have a good lawyer. The truth is on our side, Grace interjected, her voice trembling with anger. And we'll pursue this to the end, no matter how long it takes. We left the police station in the early morning, with a copy of the report in hand and a vague promise that they'd investigate. On the way home, Grace told me she'd tried calling Edward multiple times, but the line was busy. He must have unplugged it. I'm sure, she said. He's probably running away. She was right. When we finally spoke to a neighbor the next day, she confirmed Edward had come home in the early afternoon, hurriedly packed his things, and driven off. He told the neighbor that his family had an emergency in Boston. What a coward, Grace muttered before hanging up. That despicable coward. The following days were a string of pain, shame, and bureaucracy. More visits to the police station, more questions. Some invasive and unnecessary enough to make me want to give up everything. But I didn't give up. Every time I thought about backing out, I remembered Edward's face, the weight of him on me, and the rage fueled me to keep going. A week later, the first shocking news came. Edward was found at a friend's house in Hartford. When the police went to arrest him, he denied everything. He said I had pursued him, that I'd become desperate after being widowed, that I'd gotten angry when he rejected me, that the injuries on my body, I had inflicted them myself to frame him, or maybe from another man, a secret lover. How could he lie like that, I cried on. Grace's shoulder. How could he twist everything like this? That's what they do, Mom? She replied, her voice as hard as stone. They try to make the victim the guilty one, but we won't let them. We'll fight. And we fought against the slow, patriarchal justice system, against the suspicious looks, against the whispers in town, the implied questions, the insinuations. Why were you alone with your son-in-law? Maybe you regretted it afterward. Right after your father's death, words like stones, thrown by people we thought understood us, respected our family. I learned in the worst way that a community that seems so united can turn its back on you when you need support the most. A few weeks after, the complaint. We were at the market when I overheard a woman say to another, "That's her, the one who came on to her daughter's husband and now claims she was raped." I felt like I'd been slapped. I dropped the groceries. Reached the middle of the path. I ran outside without looking back, struggling to breathe. Grace saw me sitting on the roadside, trembling like a leaf. "I can't take it anymore, darling," I said between sobs. "I can't bear those stares, those comments. How could they believe him over me? How could they think I'd do something like that to a friend, to your family?" Right then, at my lowest point, Grace made a decision that would change our lives forever. "Let's leave here." "Mom, let's start over somewhere else, where no one knows us, where we don't have to go through this every day. And the process, justice, we'll keep fighting for it from afar. We'll go attend hearings when necessary, but we can't stay here. Mum, it's destroying you. It's destroying us." She was right. Bar Harbor, the town I'd loved all my life, had turned into a prison of accusing glances and harsh words. Every street corner held a memory, now poisoned by doubt, by betrayal, not just from Edward, but from a whole community that chose the easier side. The decision of where to go came in an unexpected way. A news report about Charleston, South Carolina, showed its historic cities, its rich culture, and local crafts. Charleston especially caught my eye with its colorful houses, ancient churches, rivers winding through lush green hills. It seemed like Bar Harbor in so many ways, but entirely different. A fresh start. "It's so far," Grace commented when I mentioned the idea. "More than a 2-day drive." "All the better," I replied. "The farther, the less chance anyone finds us. The less likely those stories follow us." It took nearly 2 months to arrange everything. I sold the house for less than it's worth, but we needed the cash quickly. I also sold most of our belongings, keeping only a few precious mementos of Charles that I couldn't let go of. The lawyer we hired for the case against Edward, with the savings Charles and I had set aside for our old age, assured us we could follow the case from afar, only returning for necessary testimony. In early 1990, we set off. A small truck carried our few possessions. Grace and I sat in the car, leaving behind the town that had once been our home, carrying wounds that were still raw and a fragile hope for a new beginning. The journey was long and exhausting, but it was therapeutic in its own way. With every mile that took us farther from Bar Harbor, the weight on our shoulders seemed to lift a little. We talked a lot during those hours on the road about the past, about the future, about how we'd rebuild our lives from the pieces Edward had left behind. We arrived in Charleston on a February evening. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the Charleston River that cut through the city, the colorful houses, the cobblestone streets, the historic churches. Everything seemed to welcome us, promising better days ahead. We rented a small house near the historic district through a real estate agency we'd corresponded with for weeks. It was simple but cozy, with a backyard where I soon imagined planting herbs for tea, maybe even setting up a small kitchen for making jams like I used to in Bar Harbor. The first days were about adjusting. The heat in South Carolina was different from Maine, drier, more intense. The way people spoke, the food, the customs. Everything took time to get used to, but gradually we settled in. Grace got a job teaching at a local elementary school. I started making jams to sell, first going door to door, then to a few small shops that sold local specialties to tourists. Meanwhile, the case against Edward dragged on slowly and windingly. We went back to Bar Harbor 3 times in that first year for hearings and testimony. Each return was painful. The stares, the whispers were still there, but they were easier to bear because we knew we had a place to return to, a refuge away from that poison. During one of those trips in August 1990, the case took a turning point. We were in the courthouse waiting room when a hesitant woman approached us. She was around 30. She had brown hair tied in a ponytail, her eyes restless and unable to meet ours. She asked in a soft voice, "Are you Mrs. Evelyn and Grace?" As if afraid of being overheard, we confirmed. We were confused and a little worried. "My name is Helen," she continued. "I'm also a victim of Edward." Those words hit us like a bomb. Helen told us right there in the waiting room that she had been Edward's student at the university 3 years before. He had slipped something into her drink. He had slipped something into her drink. She woke up naked and injured in a cheap motel. "I never reported it," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared that he would ruin my academic life. Scared that he would ruin my academic life. Scared of the shame. But when I heard about your case, when I read about it in the papers..." Helen wasn't the only one. In the following months, 2 other women came forward with similar stories. One former colleague, one neighbor from Baltimore, at different ages, different circumstances, but the same pattern: drugged drinks, fuzzy awareness, sexual assault. Suddenly, it wasn't just my word against him. It was 4 women, 4 stories, 4 sets of evidence pointing to a serial predator who had spent years attacking vulnerable women, relying on their silence out of fear and shame. The case took on a new direction. Local newspapers started covering the predatory professor, his nickname. Police reopened previous investigations that had been shelved for lack of evidence. Edward, who had been responding to the accusations while free, was ordered into preventive detention, but he escaped again. This time, they believed he was abroad. "We'll catch that bastard," the new prosecutor assured us. "Now that we have the established pattern, we have witnesses, we have strong evidence. It's just a matter of time." Time, which sometimes was our greatest ally, sometimes our greatest ally. Time heals wounds, but it also allows criminals to escape, evidence to fade, memories to blur. For us in Charleston, time started working in our favor. With each passing day, the pain became a little less intense. The pain became a little less intense, though it never fully disappeared. Some scars are permanent, but we learned to live with them. In August 1991. Exactly a year after Helen approached us at the courthouse. We got the news. Edward had been arrested in Mexico while trying to board a flight to Guatemala with fake papers. He would be extradited to the United States to face the charges. The trial in January 1992 was one of the hardest, yet most liberating moments of my life. I had to recount the details of that horrific night, facing the eyes, some full of compassion, others still skeptical. Hearing the defense attorney try to discredit us, to prove we were all liars, opportunists, unstable. But this time it was different. This time we weren't alone. We were 4 women united by pain, but also by the courage to speak out for justice. And we had support from women's groups in Baltimore who had heard about the case and came to show solidarity, ensuring the media covered the trial fairly. When the judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison for aggravated rape, along with additional penalties for abuse of trust and intent, I felt something break inside me. It wasn't quite joy. How could there be joy in something so tragic? But it was a kind of release. A weight lifted off my shoulders, a cloud dissipating, allowing the sun to shine through again. That night, back at the hotel in Bar Harbor, Grace and I opened a bottle of wine. Ironically, the very drink that had once been used to drug me. But this time, it symbolized reclaiming our power to justice. We toasted, not just for Edward's sentence, but for all the big and small victories we'd won through those terrible years. The courage to report it, the strength to start over, the resilience to keep fighting when everything seemed lost, and for new beginnings, I added, thinking of our new life in Charleston, the friendships we were building there, the possibilities opening up before us. Now, as this darkness finally began to fade, the road ahead was still long. Wounds, especially emotional ones, would take much longer to heal fully, if they ever did. But at that moment, we knew the worst was over. Over. We had faced the monster and somehow won. The next day, we returned to Charleston, leaving behind not just Bar Harbor, but the darkest chapter of our lives. It was time to move forward, to rebuild, to find joy again in a world that, despite everything, still had so much to offer. Charleston welcomed us with open arms, as if the historic city knew we needed healing. We returned from the trial with a strange feeling of relief and exhaustion, like someone who had just ended a long battle and only then realized how wounded they were. The small house we rented in the historic neighborhood took on new meaning after February 1992. It was no longer just a temporary shelter, but the place where we truly began to live again. I painted the walls a soft yellow, planted flowers in the little front garden, hung colourful curtains I'd bought at the local market. Each small touch was an affirmation. We're here. We're alive. We're starting over. The South Carolina heat, so different from Bar Harbor, became familiar. Waking up to sunlight streaming through the windows, the smell of coffee mingling with the aromas from the nearby market, birds nesting in the trees in the yard. Those simple daily blessings that I could hardly notice before, but now meant so much. The ability to find joy in the simple things once more. Grace threw herself into her work at the school where she taught. Her students admired her. The parents respected her. The principal always commented on her dedication. That new teacher, the jam maker's daughter, was a gift to our community. I once heard at the market. My heart swelled with pride. After all we'd been through, seeing my daughter thrive was like balm for the soul. For me, my jams started gaining popularity in the area. I began with an impromptu stall at the Sunday market, selling peach pies, cobbler, lemon squares, and honey cakes. Before long, small orders came in for birthdays, baptisms, even weddings. Within 6 months, I couldn't handle it all myself in the small home kitchen. Ms. Zelda, a woman I met at church, suggested I rent a separate space. With your talent, Mrs. Evelyn, you deserve a real shop. I know a vacancy near the city market. It's from a friend of mine. I can introduce you. The place was perfect. An old house with thick walls, a front room for the shop, and a spacious kitchen in the back. The rent was a bit higher than I planned to spend, but I decided to take the risk. I used part of the savings from Bar Harbor to renovate the space and buy basic equipment, like industrial ovens, molds, and tools. In July 1992, we opened Evelyn's shop. I decorated the little store with lace tablecloths made by local artisans, painted the walls a pale blue with gold accents, and placed flower vases in the corners. On the front, a sign designed by a local artist, showing the shop's name along with southern fruit motifs. The opening day was a small celebration. Grace invited her colleagues from school. Curious neighbours stopped by. Even the pastor from Trinity Church passed by to give his blessing. I served samples of jams, fresh coffee, and peach appetizers that I'd learned to make with Ms. Zelda. People smiled, complimented, and promised to return. And they did. In the following months, the shop gained loyal customers. Tourists visiting Charleston, drawn by its historical heritage and southern charm, stopped to taste my specialties and left with small packages as souvenirs. Local merchants began ordering jams to resell in their stores and restaurants. Before long, I needed help. I hired 2 local women, Nancy and Diane, to assist with production. I taught them the secrets I'd learned from my mother, adapting to southern ingredients, like peach pies with pecans, lemon squares with a hint of honey, and sweet potato cakes with fresh coconut. You've brought a bit of the north to our south, but with our flavors, Nancy said one day while learning apple butter. That phrase touched my heart deeply. It was exactly what I was trying to do with my life, bringing the good from the past, but transforming, adapting, and creating something new from the scars. Grace thrived as well. In 1993, she was promoted to educational coordinator at the school. We moved to a larger, more comfortable house with a porch overlooking the Charleston River. On Sunday afternoons, we'd sit there with iced tea, watching the small boats drift by, families gathering on the banks for picnics, the simple, authentic life of the community that had welcomed us. One April afternoon in 1994, Grace told me about William. He's a history teacher at the school. Mum, he moved to Charleston 6 months ago. He's a widower with a 5-year-old daughter named Sophie. I noticed something different in her eyes when she spoke of him. A spark I hadn't seen since before Edward. I have to admit, I felt afraid. After all we'd been through, The idea of Grace getting involved with another man made me nervous. What if he's another monster in disguise? Have you known him long enough, darling? I asked, trying not to sound too worried. Do you know about his past? About his family? She smiled, understanding. I know. Mom, I've asked all the questions you're imagining. I've talked to people who know him in Charleston and with his late wife's family. He's a good man, Mom, honest, kind, and he understands our story. I've told him everything. And how did he react? I asked, full of concern, with compassion, no judgment. He said he admires our courage and hopes one day to be fully worthy of my trust. Still, it took me time to accept the idea. When I finally met William a few weeks later at a dinner at our house, I observed every gesture, every word, every glance. I was looking for signs, clues of any danger. But what I saw was just a gentle man with a soft voice and kind eyes, who treated Grace with almost reverent respect, and his little daughter, Sophie, with genuine love. Little Sophie won my heart almost immediately. A smart girl with curly hair and an endearing smile, who had lost her mother too early to illness, yet still radiated joy. When she shyly approached and asked if I could teach her to make jams like in the pretty shop, I felt something melt inside me. Grace and William's relationship progressed cautiously, as expected. Weekends out with Sophie, family dinners, and long conversations on the porch under the South Carolina moon. She allowed herself to love again, but this time with eyes wide open, no longer with the rush of youth as before. In December of that year, William proposed to her. It wasn't anything grand, just a simple proposal during a picnic by the river with Sophie as witness, holding a small flower she'd picked specially for the occasion. Grace accepted, but with one condition, an engagement of at least a year. I want to be absolutely sure. Mom, she explained to me later, not just for me, but for Sophie. She's lost a mother. I can't step into her life if I don't intend to stay. I admired my daughter's maturity. At 29, she had a wisdom I didn't have, even at 40. The trials had forged in her a clarity, a caution that, ironically, perhaps protected her more than any advice I could give. 1995 was a year of preparation, not just for the wedding, which would be simple, but for the new life taking shape. William sold his small house on the outskirts of Charleston and, with Grace, bought a larger plot of land, where they would build gradually. I helped them as much as I could, investing part of the profits from the growing shop. Meanwhile, Sophie spent more time with me. She'd come to the shop after school, sit on a tall stool in the kitchen and watch me work, asking 1,000 questions, wanting to help with everything. Gradually, she became attached, became my granddaughter, long before any papers made it official. Grandma Evelyn, can I stir the jam? She'd ask, her eyes lighting up with expectation. The first time you called me that, I felt tears well up. I never thought I'd become a grandmother this way. Through the winding paths life led us. But there she was, a child who needed love as much as I needed to give it, filling a void in my heart I didn't know was empty. The wedding took place in February 1996, exactly a year after the proposal. It was a simple ceremony at the historic Trinity Church in Charleston, followed by a celebration in the yard of the couple's new home, still under construction, but with the roof and main walls up. I insisted on preparing all the sweets. A lavish table with lemon squares, peach pies, cakes, jams, all made by my own hands for my daughter. Nancy and Diane took care of the shop, so I could focus entirely on the preparations in the days before. It was a truly joyful day without any shadows, seeing Grace at the altar, radiant in a simple yet elegant lace dress, beside a man who looked at her with genuine admiration. I felt that we had finally left the past behind. Not forgotten. We could never forget completely, but moved forward, rebuilt, turned scars into marks of a battle won. Sophie, beautiful in a light blue dress, wearing the ring with a 7-year-old's serious humor. When the pastor pronounced Grace and William husband and wife, she jumped for joy. Joy that made everyone present smile. The party went on until dawn. Neighbors, school colleagues, shop customers, the friends we'd made over the years in Charleston, all celebrating not just the union, but a new beginning. A victory over adversity. At some point in the night, when the moon was high in the sky and the sound of a local jazz band lulled the guests, I found myself thinking of Charles. What would he say if he could see our daughter now? How would he feel knowing everything we'd been through since he left? He'd be proud. A voice inside me answered, "Proud of both of you, of the strength and dignity you faced the worst with and built something new and beautiful from the ruins." This certainty brought me a peace I hadn't felt in a long time, as if somehow Charles was there blessing the moment, approving the choices we'd made, the paths we'd taken. The years that followed were ones of solidifying this new life. The shop prospered. I even opened a second location in Charleston's tourist center in 1998. Grace got pregnant in 1997, gave birth to a boy, Benjamin, my first biological grandson. A boy with lively eyes, with the smile of the grandfather he never knew. Sophie, now officially my granddaughter, grew up healthy and bright, always splitting her time between school and helping at the jam shop, where she declared one day would be hers. "I'll make jams even better than yours, Grandma," she'd say with the absolute confidence of youth. And I didn't doubt it. As the new millennium approached, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey. The journey that had been my life up to that point. From the cobblestone streets of Bar Harbor to the colorful hills of Charleston. From youthful love with Charles to the horror at Edward's hands. And finally, to peace. Peace in seeing my daughter happy, my grandchildren growing up healthy, my business thriving. In December 1999, stepping into 2000, we threw a big party at Grace and William's house, the house now fully built and cozy. As I looked at my family gathered, Grace, William, teenage Sophie, 2-year-old Benjamin running around, I felt a deep gratitude, almost painful. We had survived. More than that, we had triumphed. The wounds would never fully vanish. I still had nightmares sometimes, still had triggers that made me shudder involuntarily. but we had rebuilt our lives step by step with the patience and resilience I never knew I had until I had to find it. Our lives step by step with the patience and resilience I never knew I had until I had to find it within myself. Charleston was no longer just a temporary refuge, as we'd thought at first. It had become our true home, where we were accepted without judgment, where we could start anew without the shadows of the past haunting every corner. People here knew us for who we were in the present, not through the traumas we'd endured, but through what we created and contributed at midnight, as fireworks burst, signaling the new millennium. I raised a glass in silent toast to the past that forged us, to the present we'd built with so much effort, to the future, unfolding before us like a sunlit path. The journey wasn't easy. There were times I thought I wouldn't survive the pain, the humiliation, the injustice. Moments when the burden seemed too heavy to carry. But each step, each decision, each small victory led us to a life that, despite the scars, or perhaps because of them, was fully worth living. And as Sophie turned 11, full of expectations for the new century, just beginning, and asked, "What are you thinking about?" I answered with the simple truth I'd learned the hard way. "I'm thinking, my dear, that sometimes we have to lose almost everything to discover who we really are. And life, though it can be cruel, also offers second chances, new beginnings, if we have the courage to seek them." She hugged me without fully understanding the weight of those words, but feeling their importance, and in that embrace, with fireworks lighting up the sky and my family around me, I knew I had finally come home, not just to a physical place, but to a state of peace I thought I'd never find again. The road to rebuilding wasn't smooth or easy. It had obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But every achievement we built, the shop, the house, the friendships, the expanded family, were authentic, ours, born not just from pain, but from refusing to let pain define us. And perhaps that's the greatest victory, turning trauma not into a lifelong prison, but into a chapter in a much larger story. A story that continues to unfold page by page with colors, flavors, and joys that no one, not even Edward, with all his cruelty, could take from us forever. Today, sitting on the porch of my little house in Charleston, watching the sunset, the river with its oranges and reds that I never tire of watching, I realize how much time has passed. I'm now 78, and my hair is completely white, but I don't dye it. My hands bear the marks of time and work with sugar and fruits. Over decades, Evelyn's Delights has become a Charleston tradition, now mostly run by my granddaughter Sophie, who inherited not just the recipes, but my determination. At 36, she's expanded the business, created new recipes, blending northern and southern traditions, and taken our jams to food fairs in Nashville, Chicago, even abroad. "It all started with you," she always says when interviewed about our success. Those words fill me with pride that the frightened woman who fled Bar Harbor could never have imagined feeling. Grace and William are still together, their relationship growing stronger with the years. She's just retired as principal of the school where she started as a regular teacher. He's still teaching history, inspiring generations with his knowledge and kindness. When I see them together, sharing coffee on the porch, exchanging knowing glances after nearly 3 decades together, I feel immense peace. My daughter found true and deserving love, the love she deserved from the start. Benjamin, my biological grandson, now 28, has gone into a path that surprised us all. He graduated in law and specializes in cases of violence against women. It's because of your story, Grandma, he told me when he decided on this career. So other women don't have to fight as hard as you and Mom did for justice. I've had the joy of seeing my great-grandchildren born, the twins, Charles and Evelyn, Sophie's children, a tribute to my husband and me, and little Grace, Benjamin's daughter, who carries on the family name tradition. I often reflect on the journey that brought me here. Not just the events, Charles's loss, Edward's violence, the escape to South Carolina, the rebuilding, but also what I learned from each moment, each trial, each small or great victory. The first and perhaps most important lesson: we're much stronger than we imagine. There's a courage in each of us that we only discover when all other options are exhausted. When I think about that horrific night when Edward shattered my trust, my safety, my dignity, and then about the long road I've traveled since, I hardly recognize the broken woman who woke up alone, hurt, not knowing what to do. Somehow, I found the strength to stand up, to fight, to start over. The second lesson: the importance of believing victims. When the people in Bar Harbor doubted me, when they thought I provoked or consented, then changed, regretted, each unbelieving word was like another blow. But when Helen and the other women stepped forward, when we finally formed a network of mutual support, we not only found the strength to face the justice system, but began to heal our emotional wounds. That's why, whenever I hear of a similar case, I always say out loud, I believe you. The third lesson: it's never too late for a fresh start. At 42, I left everything I knew, home, roots, to seek a new beginning thousands of miles away. I had only my daughter, a little savings, and a lot of fears for the future. Today, 3 decades later, I have a large family, a thriving business, close friends, and a community that welcomed me as if I always belonged. The fourth lesson: the transformative power of work and creativity. For me, making jams wasn't just a way to survive. It was therapy. It was a connection to my roots, a way to turn simple ingredients into something that brought joy to others. On my hardest days, when memories of the trauma threatened to paralyze me, it was in the kitchen, with my hands kneading dough, that I found peace. Peace. Each perfect jam that came out was a small victory against the chaos. The fifth, and perhaps most profound lesson: evil exists. It's a fact. Sometimes it's disguised in friendly faces and polite smiles. But good exists too. And, in the end, it has greater resilience, more strength. Edward nearly destroyed our lives, But look at what we've built despite him, perhaps even because of him. A stronger family, a supportive community, a legacy of love and hard work passed on to the fourth generation. Recently, I learned through old news that Edward died in prison in 2001 after serving only 9 of his 15 years. They said it was a heart attack. Ironically, the very cause that took Charles. I felt no joy or sadness upon hearing it, just an unusual relief, as if a chapter could finally close completely. I thought I might feel more, maybe fresh anger, perhaps bitter satisfaction. But the truth is, for a long time now, Edward held no power over my thoughts, my emotions, or my life anymore. He was just a page turned in a much larger and more beautiful book. And perhaps that's the greatest victory, living a full life, rich, in love and purpose to the point that those who tried to destroy us become irrelevant, not forgotten. I'll never forget what happened, but it's just a minor note in a much bigger story of my existence. Dear viewers, if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. Every subscription gives me strength to keep sharing these memories. Memories that aren't always easy to relive, but might help those going through difficult times. With love from Grandma Evelyn, who learned that the scars we carry don't define who we are, but what we choose to do with them. Yes. Today, I choose to live happily. I choose to cherish each day as a gift. I choose to see beauty even in the most unexpected places. And that can take you much farther than you ever imagined.